For 40 years, America made a bet. A huge bet that seemed to pay off for everyone. We were promised a new era of prosperity built on a simple idea. We send our factories and jobs overseas, and China sends us cheap goods in return. Our store shelves were always full, prices kept dropping, and it felt like we were winning. But what if the real price of that bet was our future? Well, the bill is coming due. We were told that depending on China for cheap stuff would make us all richer. And for a little while, it seemed to work. But behind the low prices and endless stream of products, a hidden cost was piling up. A cost not just in dollars, but in lost jobs, hollowed-out towns, and a dangerous dependency that has left us shockingly vulnerable. The 40-year bet America made on China is about to explode, and the economic reality we're facing is far more serious than anyone is prepared for. It all started back in the late 1970s and early 80s, right after the U.S. and China normalized relations. A powerful idea took hold in Washington and on Wall Street. China, with its massive workforce, was opening for business. The logic was simple. Why make things here when we can make them there for a tiny fraction of the cost? Corporations would get higher profits, and American shoppers would get more affordable products. It was sold to us as the ultimate win-win, and so the bet was made. One president after another, one CEO after another, they all embraced this new globalized world. The U.S. gave China most favored nation trading status, which later became permanent, clearing the path for China's entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001. That one decision put the whole relationship into overdrive. What was a trickle of trade turned into a flood. In 1980, trade between the U.S. and China was about $5 billion. By 2004, it had ballooned to over $231 billion. In the very beginning, the trade balance was actually in America's favor, but that didn't last. The first real sign of trouble appeared as a tiny number on a government spreadsheet. While trade was roughly in balance, 1985 was the year the U.S. began running a persistent trade deficit with China. It was the start of a trend that would see that deficit grow year after year, spiraling into a multi-trillion-dollar problem that now defines the entire economic relationship. The bet was on, but nobody was paying attention to the stakes. For decades, the upside of this bet was all you ever heard about. The downside was accumulating silently in the background. Now, those costs are bursting into the open. So how did this win-win become a full-blown crisis? It starts with the most misunderstood number in economics, the trade deficit. Think about it like your own budget. If you keep spending more money on your neighbor's stuff than you earn from selling them your own, you're running a deficit. Now, imagine doing that for decades, with the numbers getting bigger every single year. That's what the U.S. has been doing with China. That tiny deficit that started in the mid-80s exploded, peaking at a jaw-dropping $420 billion in 2018. Even with all the tariffs and trade wars, the U.S. goods trade deficit with China was still a massive $295.5 billion in 2024. Protectionists see this as proof of a toxic relationship that has wiped out millions of American jobs. Other economists argue it's not that simple, because those dollars we spend can be invested back into the U.S. or used to buy goods from other countries. But what no one disputes is the earthquake that hit the American economy. As cheap imports flooded in, entire industries that were once the backbone of the American middle class were simply hollowed out. This wasn't some abstract shift on a chart. It had a very real, very human cost. Across the industrial heartland, from Ohio to Michigan to Pennsylvania, factory towns that had been hubs of prosperity for generations started to wither and die. The story was the same everywhere. A local factory, the biggest employer in town, would announce it was moving production to China to stay competitive. First came the layoffs. Then, the plant shut down for good, and the jobs never came back. The small businesses that relied on that factory, the diners, the hardware stores, the mechanics, they all started to close down too. Young people had to leave to find work, and the tax base that funded schools and local services evaporated. That story, repeated in thousands of communities, is the story of American deindustrialization. Economists estimate that trade with China cost the U.S. millions of manufacturing jobs, especially after 2001. We were promised that new, high-tech jobs would appear to replace the old ones. For some people, they did. But for millions of others, that promise was a lie, leaving behind a legacy of economic despair and broken communities. But the hidden cost goes way beyond lost jobs. The 40-year bet has created a national security crisis hiding in plain sight. We didn't just outsource production, we outsourced control. Today, the United States is dangerously dependent on China for things that are absolutely critical to our survival. Take a look in your medicine cabinet. China is the world's dominant supplier of the raw ingredients, the active pharmaceutical ingredients, or APIs, for thousands of essential medicines. For some of the most common antibiotics, like amoxicillin, the supply chain is almost entirely dependent on China. It's estimated that China supplies over 90% of the U.S. market for ibuprofen and 70% for acetaminophen. It supplies huge portions of the ingredients for drugs that treat everything from high blood pressure to Alzheimer's. And it doesn't stop there. China also dominates the processing of rare earth minerals, which are essential for everything from your smartphone and your electric car to our most advanced military hardware, like F-35 fighter jets and missile guidance systems. We made a bet for cheaper t-shirts and TVs, and in the process, we handed a strategic rival a terrifying amount of leverage over our health and our national security. In a future crisis, Beijing could simply turn off the tap, and the U.S. would be left scrambling. If you're finding this analysis valuable, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell. We release investigations like this every week. For years, these costs were easy to ignore. But now, the bet is finally blowing up in our faces. The consequences aren't theoretical anymore. We're living them. The COVID-19 pandemic was the ultimate stress test of our globalized system, and it exposed just how fragile everything had become. Suddenly, the entire world woke up and realized that the production of essential medical gear, face masks, gowns, ventilators, was overwhelmingly concentrated in one country, China. As Beijing went into lockdown, the factories shut down and the global flow of these critical goods just stopped. The richest, most powerful country on earth couldn't get its hands on basic medical supplies because we had decided 30 years ago that it was cheaper to let someone else make them. The chaos didn't end with the pandemic. We're now seeing how this deep dependency fuels the inflation you feel every time you go to the store. When a single shipping container stuck in a port on the other side of the planet can shut down production for American companies, it creates shortages and drives up prices for all of us. The official response has been a messy series of trade conflicts. The tariffs that started in 2018 were supposed to rebalance the relationship and punish China's unfair practices. And while they did shrink the trade deficit from its peak, they haven't solved the core problem. Total trade between the U.S. and China was still over $582 billion in 2024. The two economies are still deeply tangled together. Now you hear a lot of corporate buzzwords like de-risking and diversifying. Companies are looking to move factories to other countries like Vietnam, Mexico, or India. But unwinding 4 decades of economic integration is a colossal task. It's slow, it's expensive, and in some cases, it's just a shell game. Many of the parts being assembled in these other countries are still made in China. The fundamental dependency doesn't go away. This leaves the United States staring down a painful economic future. There are no easy fixes here. The goal for many is reshoring, bringing manufacturing back home, but that comes with a very steep price. American consumers, who have gotten used to decades of impossibly low prices, would have to foot the bill. Rebuilding entire industries from scratch and training a new generation of skilled workers will take years, maybe decades. The tariffs and trade wars have produced mixed results, at best. They've definitely shined a spotlight on the problem, but they've also raised costs for American businesses and families. Some studies even suggest the trade war hurt the U.S. economy while barely denting China's. The hard truth is that after 40 years of betting everything on a deeply integrated global economy, trying to pull back is a messy, painful process. This is challenging the very structure of our economy, which for decades has prioritized consumption over production. So now we're stuck in a state of economic limbo. We've finally woken up to the danger of the bet we made, but we have no clear idea of how to get out of it. The road ahead is going to be defined by tough choices between national security and low prices, between global interconnectedness and our own resilience here at home. We started with a simple bet: cheap goods in exchange for our factories. That single deal shaped the modern world. It delivered an age of consumer abundance like we'd never seen before, but it came at a price we are only now starting to calculate. The hollowing out of our industrial heartland, the creation of critical vulnerabilities in our supply chains, and the slow erosion of our economic independence. That was all in the fine print of a contract America signed 40 years ago. The era of that bet is over. The explosion is happening now, reshaping our economy and our world. The comfortable assumptions we lived by are gone, replaced by a harsh new reality of strategic competition and fragile supply chains. The question is no longer asterisk if asterisk the bet has failed, but what do we do now that it has? What is the next bet America should make? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into the critical issues shaping your future, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching.